Good morning everyone, it's Clive. Welcome to the Mitchell Brewery and it's time for more brewing, and I've got the boiler on as you can see, and let the fun begin. Those eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted a slight difference in the Mitchell Brewery, and soon all will be revealed. As you can see, the boiler is in, I've got my malt and my hops ready, and I'm going to introduce you to the new Mitchell Brewery. This is the old Mitchell Brewery, and you can see what's happened. We've had an extension built and that basically overlapped onto the brewery, so I had to cut out the corner where the brewing used to happen, and I bought ourselves a new shed, and this is the new Mitchell Brewery. So welcome. A nice little setup, a little bit smaller than the old shed, but still I've got it all sorted and the brewing started. I've shown you this before. This is a really good source of beer recipes. This is DIY Dog. This is from Brew, and what I'm doing now today is I've based my beer on 5 AM Saint. Now I've not got all the ingredients here, so what I've done, I've basically modified my recipe, the recipe for 5 AM Saint, to the ingredients that I've got. So you can see here, this is what I'm starting with, this is the hops and these are the malts, and I've got all of the ingredients here. I've got my Maris Otter, I've got my crystal malt, torrefied wheat, caram malt, pale wheat malt, Munich malt, amber malt, and a whole cascade, haha, get it, cascade of hops here. Cascade, East Kent Goldings, Pilgrim, Magnum, and some Citra. So not quite the same as 5 AM Saint, but I'm sure I'm going to make a good brew after all. So we're aiming for about 5% according to this, so I'm just waiting for the boiler to get to temperature and then let it cool down to the temperature I need. So this brewing is taking place in the gap between Christmas of 2018 and New Year, so it's the 30th of December, and you can see I've got one or two little Christmas presents that have come into play. This is my temperature probe. This is, I suspect, just an ordinary meat probe, and this is nicely keeping an eye on the temperature. I've also got this strange looking thing. This is where I'm going to put my pellet hops. Now these things are a bit of a nightmare, so I'm hoping this will contain all the sludge from the pellet hops. So this has got a lid, and that just goes up just like that. So if this works out, I'm going to get maybe another couple of these, because this looks like quite a good way of keeping control of those messy pellet hops. So the boiler has reached 100 degrees C, and I'm now letting it cool down to less than 80. I've got my mash tun ready. I'm going to add 10 litres of this water when it's cooled down. I've got my malt ready, and I'm going to weigh out the malt now and add to the mash tun in preparation. This is Maris Otter. It's the main malt that I use. I'm going to use 2.9 kilograms of this, whereas the rest is more measured out in about 250-300 grams. This provides most of the sugar, and as you can see here, you can see it's quite dusty looking, and that dust is essentially the sugar in the malt. And of course you remember that malt is made from barley, which has been allowed to sprout and then stopped, and then it's kilned, and that basically contains all the sugar that the grain would have normally used to grow into a plant, and we're using that sugar, that energy, and we're converting that sugar into alcohol for our beer. I've got about just over 4.5 kilograms of malt of various descriptions ready and waiting. I'm just waiting for the boiler to cool down. So what I'm doing, I'm weighing out 10 litres of boiled and cooled water and adding it incrementally into the mash tun. I'm just literally just tipping it in. And the idea here is that we get all of the grain in contact with water, because we want to dissolve the sugar from the grain into solution. That's 10 litres of boiled and cooled water in with the grain. I'm going to put the lid on now, and I'm going to seal it up. I've got a special cover which I put over a mash tun. I'm going to just lower this down now in place. Mash tun is sealed. I'm going to leave that now for an hour and a half. So it's 10:30 AM, so it's going to be midday before I can open this up again. So what's happening here, I've insulated it. The water is going to be dissolving the sugar away from the malt, and I'll get an extra extract, which is a solution which will go back into the boiler. In the meantime, this boiler is going to have to be refilled and set to boil again, because this water will be used to sparge, i.e. drain through the mash tun to dissolve all the sugar away into another container. That container will then contain the sweet wort, which is basically the sugary solution, which will go back into the boiler to be boiled up to add the hops. That's the boiler refilled. It's about 47 degrees now, so it's going to take a little while, probably another hour plus, to get back up to boiling. While I'm waiting for the boiler to get back up to 100 degrees C, I'm going to rehydrate my yeast. This is the yeast that I'm using today, and basically what I've done is I've boiled some water and I have sterilised this cup, this glass here, with boiled water. I've got 110 mils of boiled water in here, which is going to tip in here. I'm going to let that cool down to less than 30 degrees C, and then I'm going to add this yeast to let it rehydrate. The boiler has come to 100 degrees C, so I'm going to let that cool down. That's my sparge water. And in readiness for the sparging, what you can see I've done, I've attached this plastic pipe, and at the end of the plastic pipe I've got the fine rose from a watering can. I've actually got a little tap on there, so it's turned off at the minute, so I'll use that to wash out the sugar from the grain when I take off the cover. Back to the yeast. This has been sitting, I tipped in the yeast into the water, which was less than 30 degrees C. So I just tipped it straight in and left it for 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to use this thermometer. I'm just going to give it a little gentle stir just to help it all get hydrated, and then just leave it again, and that will then rehydrate properly and it will froth up. This is one of the most pleasurable parts of brewing, is revealing the mash tun. So let's take off the cover and then just have a look inside, and oh, lovely malty goodness, very malty Ovaltine goodness of the mash. What I do now is just turn on the tap and drain off the first flush. So I'll let off some of this drain off. What I do then is I'll tip it back through the grain. This acts as a filter bed to capture any particles of fine material, and that helps to clarify the beer. So I'll do this a couple of times. The water in the boiler is less than 80 degrees C. I'm going to use this now to sparge through the grain, through the fine rose, and then what will end up in here is 20-25 litres of the sweet wort, which will go back into the boiler to be boiled up with the hops that converts it from the sweet to the bitter wort. Here we go. I'm going to turn on the sparger and you can see the water coming out. And what I do is I just play this over the surface of the grain, trying not to get it too waterlogged. So basically just to keep the sort of washing action. This is going to take about at least 15-20 minutes for all of this water to go through here, through the grain and into this container here. As you can see, I've used two containers because this is, remember, got to be tipped into here, so when it's full up that's pretty difficult to manage, although to be perfectly frank I'll probably use that to decant into here. I've got a second container and you can see that the sparging still continues, so we're at about 15 minutes into sparging and we've only got a bit left, so it won't take much longer. The boiler has been filled up with the sweet wort, roughly about 56-57 degrees C at this stage. This is going to have to boil again, and when it gets to boiling this is when we'll add the hops. I'm letting the mash tun drain. There's a little bit of this left, and basically I'll use this to top up the boiler because during the hot boil, when it's boiling, it boils for an hour and a half. There's quite a lot of loss due to evaporation. I'll use this to top up the boiler rather than using just water. I can use some, this is obviously got sugar in it from the grain, so this will take a little while now to get back up to temperature. Oh well, this often happens. Can you hear that? Precisely. The boiler's cut out, so I'm going to have to empty it and clean the element and then put it all back together again. This is pretty annoying because basically that's just energy going up in the air, but there you go. That's one of the problems with these electric boilers, is that they cut out. So in the future, if I'm going to get another boiler, it'll probably be a gas-fired one, because you've got more control. And there's the culprit. Can you see the element at the bottom, the coppery thing underneath the filter? You can see it's coated, and I need to scrub it off. I've got a trusty scrubbing run, that'll do. A bit of cold water, scrub it off, put it all back together again, should be fine. There you go, that's more like it. If you can get them like that, you should be fine. What to do with the spent malt and hops, come to say that. You can see what I'm doing. I'm excavating from the mash tun. I'm using the sink drainer and then let it drain out, and I just transfer this into a plastic bag. Some people say, like, oh, you could bake cookies out of them. No thanks. Or you could feed them to pigs. I haven't got a pig or live near a pig, so I'm just basically, I'm afraid, put them in a bag and they go in the bin. The sweet wort is now back up to about 76 degrees. This is where it was when it cut out. So it's probably set me back about half an hour. And that's not bad going. Actually, in the past, this would have panicked me a little bit, but I sort of just get on with it and just deal with it, and it doesn't take long at all. So hopefully that'll be the only time it cuts out, and I'm sure I can crack on. Not far off adding hops. Here we go. Cascade. I'm going to just show you what this looks like. This is the flake variety of hops. Can you see there? What we've got here. The hop cones from the hop plant, which have been dried and then vacuum packed. So I just need 2.5 grams. This is a pack of about 100 grams. And there's another variety, pellet variety, which I'll show you in a mo. Here we have the hops ready to add, and I literally just tip them in. Might need a bit of a stir just to encourage them to go in. Give it a nice healthy stir. Get the hops in there, get those lovely hoppy resins infusing into the beer, and convert the sweet wort into bitter wort. There it is. That's a perfect rolling hop boil. You can see these are the hops in there being turned around in the wort. Lovely. You can see why I've got the fan going, even though it's the end of December. Look at that condensation on the windows. This place would be completely dripping if I didn't have this fan in, so it's a good idea just to have a fan going, just to blow that condensation out the door. And also, you know, share the benefit of the lovely hoppy malty aromas with your neighbours. Just adding the copper chiller into the boiler before it turns off, because the boiling wort will sterilise the copper chiller. Oh no! I've just lost me thermometer. Take two! I just lost my thermometer into the boiler. I've just added the copper chiller, as I said before. This is so that it sterilises in the boiling wort. I need to now reconnect the pipe to the tap, which is now miles away. So I've got to get on with that, reconnecting. I showed you flake hops before. These are pellet hops, and they're literally, as they sound, they're just little pellets. Little pellets. In fact, they're a little bit like rabbit food. But this is basically hops that have been compressed, and they're a bit more concentrated than leaf, I suppose. So that's it. The bitter wort is ready now to be decanted. It's this copper chiller took about 20 minutes to cool the bitter wort down to less than 30 degrees C. Now I'm going to transfer it into this clean, sterilised container here. we go, just decanting from the boiler into fermentation bin, and not bad, getting a good volume there, so let's carry on. Here we go, the bitter wort is tucked up into the primary fermentation bin. Last thing I need to do now is pitch the yeast into here and then leave it for about 3 or 4 days before adding the dry hops. Okay, it's a little bit longer than I normally like to leave the beer in the primary fermenter, with probably nearly 2 weeks. I dry hopped in the meantime. The fermentation is finished, the bubbler has stopped bubbling, and during the last sort of week or so I popped in some hops in here in these for dry hopping. You can see I've got my pressure barrel all sterilised and ready. I've weighed out 71 grams of sugar, plus popped in some beer finings, so there's the sugar. I'm also going to take a sample to work out the sugar content, so I can work out the alcohol content at this stage. So let the siphoning fun begin. Here we go, siphoning in action. You can see I've got a just about to see it there at the bottom there. I've got a pipe that's going all the way up, and then I'm siphoning through this into the pressure barrel. I've removed the dry hop containers. I was also taking a couple of samples for the hydrometer test as well. So this shouldn't take me too long. It only takes about 15-20 minutes to siphon all this into the pressure barrel. This will then stay for 24 hours and I'll bottle up tomorrow. That's filled the barrel up pretty much right to the top. That'll stay in here overnight and I'll fill up with bottles. So it'll probably be in here 24 hours plus, and then it'll go into bottles. This is what you're left with in the bottom of the primary fermentation bin. That's mostly yeast plus bits and pieces of malt and fines from the brewing process, but in theory I could recover the yeast from here and use it for the next batch, but I've never done that. I don't fancy doing that. You have to store it somewhere and make sure it was immaculately clean, so I'd rather carry on using the dried and hydrated yeast that I've been using in this process so far. Here are the dry hop containers. I just have to rinse these out now, so it's a bit of a manky process, but they'll be reusable for the next time I brew. Okay, it's the next day. I've got 40 bottles ready to be filled up. I'm going to do it the old school way. I've got mostly the sort of grog style tops, but I've got a few that I need to use my crank cap device here, so I'm going to crack on with this, and then I'll label them up in a bit. One thing to watch out for when bottling up, don't be tempted to fill it right to the very top. Leave about an inch or so from the top, and this space here is called the ullage. So if you look in here, according to Andy Hamilton's lovely book, basically the ullage is the airspace, and that's needed so the beer can carbonate correctly. So this comes from this great book by Andy Hamilton, recommended. So watch out for that. If you're not sure about using one of these crown cappers, here we go. This is the crown cap. You can see basically it's a cap that's splayed out, and all you do is you take this, you attach it to the magnetic part here, and then you position the crown capper on the bottle, and then you push out the levers, and that forces the cap onto the top of the bottle. Just be careful when you do this, because you have to put some pressure, downward pressure. You can see here I've got a tea towel. This tea towel has been wetted slightly so it doesn't move. So to make sure that the cap is on properly, see if it moves, and then with a bit of confidence turn your bottle upside down. If there's any leakage, then there isn't a proper seal. You want a proper seal, because if air gets in, you'll end up with stale beer. Here we go. I got slightly more than 40 bottles. I got 47 bottles, plus I filled up this whiskey bottle, so that's going to be a whiskey infused beer. So I'll see how that goes. I'll have to take that one up because it's in a clear bottle. So brilliant stuff. Okay everyone, that's this batch finished. Happy brewing. See you next time. Cheers.